Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk Maywood on Diversity Today Media. I am your host, Dr. Reggie Ratliff, and joining me is my co-host, my co-laborer in the vineyard, and expert investment analyst, Terrence Hollingsworth. Terry, good evening.
What's up, Dr. Ratliff? How's it going this evening?
God is good, man. It's good. Another good day on
Yes,
earth,
sir.
man. And it's good to be seen and not viewed. So I thank God for another day.
Yeah, man. So, how's the weather out there in DC?
Well, it's a little bit on the chilly side. Fall is in the air. It's a little cooler, overcast, but it's good running weather. And wrestling season is on the horizon. Yes,
Yeah, the
sir.
best part of the year, baby.
Best part, best sport, and best results. Absolutely. So I'm excited, man. How about you? How are things going with you?
Believe it or not, it's cooler, but it's warmer than it's normally being because I know the time of the season when football start,
Hmm.
and a couple of things I know. If I don't get to a game in the first couple of weeks, it's usually too cold, and then I
Yeah.
ain't going. And then by the
Right.
time what Halloween comes, it's really cold and it's raining.
Right.
So
Jerry. Yeah. Well, I
yeah,
want to, speaking of football, I want to give a birthday shout out to my son, Sean Ratliff II, who is doing great things on the football field at Concord University in the state of West Virginia. So he's doing his thing out there. He turned 22 years old today. So happy birthday, son. Sonny, as I call him. Love you and keep doing your thing out there in West
he
Virginia.
full and grown now, huh?
He grown. I mean, I wish he could pay his own bills, his own tuition. Shoot, he got a scholarship with that out of state difference, man. Woo, but it's all good. He's an investment, and he's doing good things, man. But yeah, he's a grown man now, so he's doing good.
Good. So how is it? Let me ask you. You got a couple of kids, and I know it's tough because I drill, or at least I try to drill this investment stuff into my
Yeah.
kids, and especially in particular my son, and it's kind of working, not great. How's that going for you?
I mean, it's a challenge. It's not something they teach in school. So, they start at a deficit. So even as a dad who was involved with corporate America and corporate finance and is an economics and business instructor and professor, it's still like, okay, dad, okay, I see it. Especially when they were young, going up to their teenage years. Now
Mm-hmm.
that they're a little bit older, um, reality is starting to hit them. Like, for example, I was able to use some of the tuition money that I set aside for Jeremiah, who's graduated, and Bashan said I was able to take some of that money and use it for your tuition. And here's why. And so they
Mm-hmm.
were able to hear that and say, okay, that makes sense. So now they pay more attention now that they're a little bit older, in terms of age and everything is young adults. And they have a great appreciation now as opposed they were in high school.
So are you able to, as they are starting to um, get into jobs, have these conversations about, um, you know, a, if you got two jobs, one's a publicly traded company and one's a privately held company,
Yeah.
which company do you go work for outside
Well,
of? Go ahead.
yeah. Well, I was gonna say we do look at we learned about the technical analysis, which again they have a great appreciation. The publicly traded companies looking at their stock shares, the fundamental analysis, looking at their performance over the course of like a year or even a quarter for that matter, and they can see if they invest a certain amount what that return on investment is potentially because nothing's guaranteed in the stock market, but they're a little bit more purposeful with how they're looking at stocks. So they're starting to invest themselves, which I'm happy because the years I thought they weren't listening, now they're starting to ask questions, and they're starting to take the initiative to invest their money. So I'm happy for them in that regard. Yeah.
And I always say for me, the litmus test is when they start doing things on their own,
Yep.
or really they start asking about. My son asked me about Sony, and he wanted to buy Sony stock
Hmm.
because they're making in a car, right? And
Right. Right.
car and all this. And guess what? Regardless of anything else, we bought the stock, man.
Yeah.
I have an opinion on whether or not it's gonna if he could have bought something different, but I don't
Hmm.
shut down. You want to
Hmm.
own it, you buy it, and
Hmm.
we start to manage the position. And for me, that's what it's always about. It's about really being active, having some exposure, and learning. Because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you only get there by learning, by investing. You can kind of
Right.
talk about stuff from a uh, about it, like 2 plus 2 is 4, but can you critically think about the other things that also create 4, right? Three
Yeah. Absolutely.
divided by 2, all
Right.
these things. So
Right.
that's important for me, and more so than anything I do, I spend a lot of time just trying to talk to people that are around me and make sure that they have some level of understanding of investment and things like
For
that.
sure. Well, I want to add to that, Terry, the fact that we are a nation of consumers,
Hmm.
as a country. So I tell my kids, you go to Subway, publicly traded company, evaluate the stock. I mean, you eating it. Why don't you take part in partially owning it? Or if you buy clothes and you go to a retail store, they're publicly traded company, don't just become a consumer, become part owner, and
Yeah.
and do your research on it. What news is impacting the economy as it relates to these companies? And then do your research and check it out and say, this is a company that is on a downswing, but I know they're going to come back up. So I will
Well,
invest.
I'll tell you, these are the intricacies about investing, though, because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as you know, I don't like to give advice very often. I want people to
Right.
be ingrained.
Right.
But very interesting thing when you talk about something like Walgreens. Walgreens
Yep.
is paying almost I think anywhere from 8 to 9% in a dividend,
Mm-hmm.
which is a great dividend.
Yep.
And it's also a stock that is 40% lower on the year. It's the worst performing stock on the Dow Jones or in the stock market or whatever. And the
Mm-hmm.
truth is that it's Walgreens. You see it everywhere you go.
Right.
And
Right.
now there's this idea of a well branded company, and if they're investable, if they're not investable, and what that
Mm-hmm.
looks like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and,
Yeah.
and so, that's where we are. One thing that we know, and this is the advantage of anybody that will take the time to pay attention to the financials. Um, we look at our neighbors, for example, and they look like they're doing well, and they may or may not be doing well, but
Right.
credit card debt is higher than it was before
Yeah.
the
Pandemic.
pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we know that there are these things, people are financing their lifestyle,
Yep.
right? And so it becomes this really important conversation for young people that do you want to uh, do what many people have done over the years and take on debt to finance a lifestyle, and that's all the way from the home down to the car to the shoes and vacations and things like this?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you try to figure it out while you're young, and over the next 10, 20 years your income gets better?
Right. Right.
So what do we normally do? We take on a lot of debt. We don't start investing until uh, generally around 35 years old is when um, the average black person starts investing,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
And what if we reverse that and start investing, at 18 or 16 when you get your first job and things like this? The value of compounding over that time makes a huge difference. And so,
Yeah. One of the things I like, Terry, about where I teach here in Northern Virginia is that they're a little bit more progressive in terms of the public schools. Now, I mentioned about the IB program, International Baccalaureate program, and the different disciplines, inclusive of IB, business management, economics, and finance. And they talk about things like that. Not too much, not a lot in depth when it comes to finance, but they do talk about it. And in many of our schools in the Chicago area, particularly in the Maywood schools, they're still a little behind the time. Now, it's not a knock on the teachers because they only have so much control. So when you are working within your means and you are teaching this information, you're capturing them even when they're in middle school, because the NYP program, the middle youth program for middle schoolers, grades 6 to 10, opens the door for learning about basic principles of finance. So when you become a DP student, a diploma student, you're learning a little bit more about finance, even if it's personal finance. It's something, it's a start. So
Yeah.
that, when you become DP candidate and you pass the IB exams, it prepares you for college. Not only do you have advanced credits up to 12 hours when you start college, but you learn more about finance. And let me just add this, Terry. Here in now throughout the country, throughout the world, they have major IB events where hundreds of colleges come in and they talk about their program. So this weekend, I'm going to be attending an IB forum that includes schools from the East Coast to the West Coast, UCLA, Portland State, University of Maryland, you know, Southern Miss. I mean, these are IB schools from all over the country, and so they're looking at the students, um, their curriculum, how well they do, and they're looking at IB business,
Yeah.
IB finance, IB economics. What did you learn? Because that increases your chances of getting in those programs, particularly the discipline programs. So I say all that to say, if we're teaching our students and they have the NYP program, Ed District 89, even if it's just starting off in Garfield, Stevenson, Irvin, whatever the case may be, by the time they matriculate to Proviso East and Proviso West and PMSA, they're that much better prepared. And then
Mm-hmm.
it just kind of goes from there. That's what's missing in our schools. And I know
So,
they've tried, but
so,
we still got a long way to go.
so what's funny about this is, we're talking about finance, and we don't have a guest tonight because we're going to talk about the strategic plan and things like
Mm-hmm.
this. But I imagine somebody may come on and then go, "Oh man, I thought they were going to talk about the Maywood Strategic Plan." The reality of it is finance is finance, and when you start understanding the principles of finance and managing debt, whether it's be personal or anything like that, it's the
Right.
same conversation. So
Yeah.
when we start talking about the federal government and municipalities and things like this,
Yeah.
very important conversation, but it's the same conversation,
It
which
is.
is, um, you know, how much debt do you take on? Can you service the debt? Which means, do you have enough money? And how much of your money, if you think about personal finance, for example, if you want to buy a house, they're going to look at 32% of your income to determine this is
Mm-hmm.
what your house payment should be,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Well, how much are we as a country? um, you know, they call it income for personal finance for federal government. They call it GDP,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
And for
Gross domestic product. Yeah.
yep, for municipalities. I mean, I don't know if they have a name for it like that, right? But it's all the same. It's managing debt, and then where does your income come from? And
Right.
so part of what is, it's not just Maywood, but it's all over the country.
Absolutely.
And even at the federal government, we have primarily derived revenue from property taxes,
Right.
right? And so, grocery store, for example, they shut down. What did they say was the main reason for
Taxes
shutting
too
down?
high.
Well, they
Taxes
said the
too high.
property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so having a strong business community that can support, alleviating property taxes or lowering property taxes are a really important aspect of how city government or government works. Let me ask you this, and we asked people this already, but what is the most important thing that needs to happen? Why does Maywood have to have a strategic plan in this moment?
Well, that's a great question, Terry. Let's talk about what the meaning of a strategic plan is. A strategic plan is basically a map to how you want your organization or business or community to look over a period of time, maybe 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, whatever. But it's something that lays out where you want your organization to be in the future. And when you do that, you're establishing that by inserting key components, not just an executive summary, projected financials notwithstanding, but also you're implementing certain business tools. Like you're looking at a SWOT analysis, which stands for strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What is the strength of the organization? You also use the business tools like the Boston Consulting Group matrix or BCG matrix, which tells you how you're going to look in terms from a revenue stream standpoint. Or you could look at, for example, a pestle analysis when you get into the political aspect, the economic aspect, the social aspect, the technological aspect, the legal aspect, and then the environmental aspect. Those are all the components that goes into a strategic plan because you want a solid community that will address issues, potential barriers like taxes, Terry, to be able to
Mm-hmm.
keep the money circulating in an economic sense in a community like the village of Maywood. So you will have a projected financial that meet all of those needs, but also from an HR perspective. So you have, say, for example, village manager, which I don't think Maywood has right now. But you have an assistant village manager. But that strategic plan covers that. It talks about projects to determine if you need to cash in TIF money or if there are grants out there that will cover projects that will meet the future needs of the village, like the Freyhampton Pool or the Freyhampton Aquatic Center. So a strategic plan is all encompassing to meet the needs and potential barriers that are coming up, which is inclusive of property taxes because it goes back to laying out the property taxes for purchasing a home, which we all know reduces the tax burden when you have an increase in ownership, and that property taxes goes to the services of the community. So the strategic plan is an important element in any entity, whether it is a governmental entity, a municipality, a business, whether it's S corp, C corp, LLC, whatever the case would be, nonprofit, NGO, so forth and so on.
When was the last time Maywood had a strategic plan?
So it was confirmed that the last strategic plan Maywood had was in 2013. And I remember that because my nonprofit organization, Eternal Light Community Services, we occupied the 200 building on Fifth Avenue, which was a former Maywood Boys and Girls Club. And I attended the meeting, which was across the street from the 200 building. And they had people coming in and proposed strategic plans, which was 2013. So that was the last time.
Okay. So what then is how has the village changed, from maybe when you grew up to 2013 to now? Because now we're in an era where um, President Biden said we're making one-time investments, once in the generation investments in the American economy that is benefiting the from Maywood to California to Georgia, all these different places.
I know that Maywood was qualified for a certain amount of, what President Biden had allocated for the nation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we know, you and I both know that that isn't enough to cover everything that's taking place in Maywood, but it's a start. So how that money is allocated and utilized is very important. That also should go into the strategic plan because it creates a roadmap for how the village is working and what the future is going to look like. So you asked the question, what's the difference between 2013, 2023? And when I grew up, my family grew up in Maywood in the early 70s. There were businesses. All right. It was different businesses. Fifth Avenue corridor was filled with businesses, local businesses, banks. There was a Maywood Proviso Bank. There was a First Suburban National Bank. There was there was, barbershops, there were restaurants, things of that nature. We had grocery stores. Everybody knows about White Way, the A&P, so forth and so on. So it was economic viability, even in the working class village like Maywood. And because of that, Terry, we had athletic programs, Little League Baseball, minor league baseball, senior league baseball. The swimming pool was active and kept up because of the tax dollars, the company tax dollars. So we didn't worry so much about where money was coming from because it was flowing and circulating in the village of Maywood. Over time, okay, because Father Time is undefeated. When the Robinson gas station started to, go out of business, and White Way unfortunately went out of business, and then things started happening with, the swimming pool and Chat's Corner and Flash Car Wash, and all those businesses started to fold. Ernie's Restaurant, Evans Cleaners, and so forth. When they started to close, or disinvestment started taking place, those businesses were not replaced, and that was the major problem. And then what happened from that, it was a chain reaction. Crime started to go up, unemployment started to rise, there became more dissension in the community. And because it wasn't happening, the changes or the evolution of the community was taking place. We didn't keep up with the times. Like our neighbors in River Forest and Forest Park and Oak Park and Westchester and Broadview, they changed too. They just kept up with the times. Maywood, unfortunately, did not have what I believe the expertise under difficult circumstances to keep up with the times. And let me just say this one thing, Terry. When there was the white flight, okay, of the late 60s that hit Chicago and even Maywood was mostly white, okay, for many years since its beginning up until like the late 60s, early 70s when we started to enter into the community. They left a lot of resources behind. Waterworks Park on 9th Avenue, we had a big hill. We had the tennis court, which is now gone, which is placed like a dog walking park or whatever. But there were 10, 11 parks. West Maywood Park, which is, on Washington, 10th and Washington. What's now Ralph Conner Park, which was, called 17th Park, Winfield Scott Park back in the day. Those resources were left behind for us. We had a roller skating rink. Okay. We had a roller skating rink at Waterworks Park. What happened to that? Well, they were not kept up. And because of that, turmoil started to slowly drop into the community. Separation started happening. And so when Mayor Freelon was elected in the early 1980s, 1983, I believe, you could see the subtle change in the community. And so you have what you have today as as a result of everything that happened going back to the early 1970s.
So I think I heard you say the importance of the business community in Maywood as it deteriorated over the years. It negatively impacted the Maywood community, right?
Absolutely.
So I'll say this because, again, why are we talking about this? Why is there a need for a strategic plan? We have been in conversations. We have heard people talking about First Avenue being the major corridor for business in Maywood. Well, prior to that, it was Fifth Avenue, right?
Yeah.
And
I forgot to mention we had the Lido movie theater right there on Fifth Avenue, right there on Fifth, right off Washington Boulevard, and it was well kept for a number of years. But again, when you look at when you look at LaGrange Township, Lyons Township, they still have an old movie theater right off, I think it's Manheim Road that turned into Old Country Boulevard or whatever. That thing's been there for decades. Why isn't the Lido there?
Me and my son used to go there because it was $2 movies.
Absolutely.
So, right?
Absolutely. But that's my point, Terry. When you don't work together, because you could disagree on policy and procedures as long as you aren't disagreeable. And that has been a downfall of Maywood from an economic standpoint. And for me, everything starts with economics and finance.
Well, that's the point, though, right? So your business districts, you got one on St. Charles, you got one on Fifth Avenue, You got one on, is that 19th or 17th? I think that might be 17th.
Yeah, 17th Avenue, Washington Boulevard has some. Madison Avenue also
Yeah.
had businesses and things of that nature. So, on North Maywood, South Maywood, there was, a lot of everybody has their own story. It depends on what part of Maywood you're from. You know what I'm saying? Those close to Broadview, over there, Harvard Avenue, and up into Roosevelt Road, they had theirs. Those of us who were in Central Maywood, right around where the bridge is,
Yeah.
we had our story, and then people who were North Maywood, near North Maywood, up to Chicago Avenue, they
Yeah,
had
I
their
didn't
stores
even
and
I
things
didn't
like
even
that.
talk about that where they have access to Winston Plaza and things like that.
Merrill's
But
Park,
that,
yeah,
yeah, that's such an important part of the conversation though, because again, the a strategic plan is supposed to clarify these things and where you put your investment dollars. So
right,
the what do you call it? The opportunity zones in Maywood is on Fifth Avenue. But then here's this important conversation that says we think we can drive an economic development not on Fifth Avenue, but on First Avenue,
right,
right?
yep,
And so economic the opportunity zones for anybody that don't know is it's a federal I don't know you call it a law. It was driven by or championed by Cory Booker to drive investments in black neighborhoods. So
yes,
when Cory became senator in New Jersey, they didn't have any grocery stores, so he wanted to um, try to create something so people will make investments. Well, they did, right? They came along and they got this law passed, and it basically allowed businesses to make investments in um, black neighborhoods, predominantly black neighborhoods, and defer taxes, in some
yep,
cases, not pay taxes at all.
right,
So I don't know if they could change the opportunity zone or what should happen, but again, you got all these business districts, and how do you utilize them in a way that benefits the community the most, and ultimately lower property taxes?
right,
So
right. Well, I'll just say this: that was a great implementation of policy by, Cory Booker, and so he was thinking, big picture, the vision, but the objective, Terry, is also as important as the vision, because when you look at a model that is built from the inside out, I go back to when I was in graduate school and I learned more about John McKnight. Says a community is built from the inside out. You use the resources from within your community to build out, to partner with other communities. And that's tried and true. When you have investors in Maywood, like the residents, who are convinced that, yes, I should invest in the village of Maywood to build a grocery store, whether it's tax deferred or tax deducted, whatever the case may be, that builds confidence in the village of Maywood. And again, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, we are a consumer-based driven economy. We go by GDP,
yeah,
which is the largest in the world, and the GNP, the gross national product. When you have buy-in from consumers, aka residents for the village of Maywood, they will invest the money in the community. You will attract investors, and you will rebuild Maywood. Now, do I expect Maywood to be as economically viable as it was in the late 60s to early 70s? Yes, but not in the same way, because these are different times. We're talking this 2023, that's like 80 years ago. You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? So whether we're talking about a data center or building something that is going to bring in some real businesses that's going to generate employment, all right, that is what's going to get Maywood, as he say, to rise to the phoenix, rise from the phoenix, and build us back up to what it was in the past.
So here's my question. First part, we agree that strategic plan has to start with economics and kind of working out the economic base. But secondly, though, is um, the demographics of Maywood are changing, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So predominantly, you got North Maywood is still predominantly white, and
Yeah.
then I'd say the core Maywood was black from the '60s up until now. But I learned something when we had the conversation about combining the football fields or football
Yes.
teams,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
that the demographics of East and West are now 60% Hispanic. We
Hmm.
talk a little bit about that.
A little bit. We touched on it, but not a whole lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying that the importance of creating a strategic plan or doing the work to
Right.
accommodate going.
Oh yeah.
Okay, we have a changing population now,
Absolutely.
so it's not
Yeah.
predominantly black,
Right.
predominantly Hispanic. And what
Yeah.
does that mean if Maywood intends to keep a black mayor, for example?
Right. Well, I tell you one thing, as I said before, Maywood has evolved over the last 70, 80 years. It was all white, then mostly white, then some black, then mostly black. Now it is mostly Hispanic. African Americans are still there, but it's now mostly Hispanic. I'll even throw in Terry. Melrose Park used to be mostly Italian.
Yeah, yeah.
Going through when I was growing up in Maywood, when I was going to Triton, growing up, you did not ride through Melrose Park on a bike as a black person, especially a black man.
When
Just
I moved to Chicago and it was 1990, that's
uh,
exactly what I was told.
do
Stay out of
not
Melrose Park.
exactly. Do not stop at the stop signs. Fly over the railroad tracks and just keep going till you get to your destination, man. And
Mm-hmm.
Fifth Avenue, I just tried to stay on that or Ninth, but it was a challenge. But with that said, now it's Hispanic. It's no longer mostly Italian. It's mostly Hispanic. So we see the evolution of community, as you mentioned, the graphics. Um, the strategic plan has to be a mirror of the community. It has to meet the demands of the community in terms of demographics, the family structure, and the direction where it's going. And where Maywood is right now is being reactive and not proactive in terms of trying to create this space that's going to be all encompassing. And so I don't blame, the mayor, the current mayor, for what happened, 80, 70, 60, 50 years ago. He has a monumental task on his hand. However, he is in a position to promote a strategic agenda that includes a strategic plan. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you haven't had one in 10 years and you still don't have one now in 2023, then it's going to be the same thing repeated as it was over the past 10 years.
What do you
So
think? What do you think the biggest challenge that Mayor Booker is facing right now?
that's a good question. I don't know Mayor Booker, so I haven't had the pleasure of talking to him. We have invited him on the podcast so we get his perspective. Only thing I know about him is what I see on social media and the events taking place. But with that said, his challenge as a mayor is always to have a coherent board, coherent village board. And it's kind of divided right now. So, as he's the executive of the village board, he has a monumental task to bring the board together. So even when there's things where there's disagreements, he has to lead and bring compromise to the board. For me, that's his biggest challenge. He also needs, in my opinion, to talk to the residents, being in touch with the residents in terms of what they're looking for the community. Not to say he hasn't, I just haven't seen it. And I come home at least once a month.
Yeah.
And I'm still very much in touch with, the village of Maywood, and the residents and things like that. So that kind of thing is important. But most importantly, we go back to the purpose of this conversation, Terry, is to put together a comprehensive strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that by having focus groups. When he had his he had a let's talk Maywood discussion.
All
Uh,
right. I wonder
what
where he
a,
got that from.
me too. What a coincidence. So when they had any discussions at the Maywood Park or the Village Hall or whatever, implement what the residents are suggesting. We do it all the time. So that needs
Okay,
to
so
happen.
that's a good question, right? The question becomes, you always have to get input from the community, but how much of the input that you get from the community um, does that matter? Because there are things like how much the debt the village has, what the bond rating is as a village,
Yeah,
things I don't know. I should
right,
probably know, but um, those things matter when you always hear people say they should. Who are they?
right.
Is it the village that takes on the responsibility, or the partnerships with other people and things like that? So
So I'm gonna say this. I'm not calling it Let's Talk Maywood. I'm gonna say his conversation with the community because we are Let's Talk Maywood.
yes,
But with that
sir.
said, his conversations with the community was inclusive of repairing the Fred Hampton, Fred Hampton pool. I'm always gonna call Fred Hampton pool. Fixing
Yeah,
that, bringing in grocery stores, bringing in the grocery store, a reliable, reputable grocery store in the village of Maywood, increasing employment, getting Washington Boulevard, which they're working on, what they've worked on for some time, getting that repaired, things like that. That should be in the strategic plan. Those kind of things are important because it is the essence of a coherent and safe community. The youth, addressing the issues with the youth, the rec center, on Ninth Avenue. They're doing some things. They're trying to work to some things to bring more programs for the youth, but they can't do it alone. The
yeah,
ninth part, they can't do it alone. They can they so we had way more children back when I was growing up than they do today. And Maywood Park District wasn't the only game in town. We also had the Central Area Park District, which included all the parks, and all those parks had activities for the children. So it wasn't just Ninth Park. It was a park, West Maywood Park on 10th and Washington. It was Waterworks Park had the tennis court. Um, it was Winfield Scott, but we had softball games and baseball games. It was, I think it was Veterans Park, the park behind the Maywood Public Library and the police station with, Lily Baseball and stuff. Those activities for the youth is very important. And also, Mr. Shapiro, Larry Shapiro will appreciate this. Activities for the seniors.
yeah,
We are not including the seniors in these type of discussions. At least I don't see enough of it, as well as the youth. A lot of talk, a lot of rhetoric. There's a desire to improve in the substance department. But those things, Terry, is what I mentioned in the strategic plan. Talk about the strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Get into the steeple analysis. Create a Gantt chart when you have projects, the task where you can compare, you can fix these things because you're painting a picture of what needs to be done and to work towards it. The financials, you can for financials, there are a lot of um, financial mechanisms that are in place that the village can pursue to either repair the pool or start over.
yeah.
It's money out there for that. I know that for a fact. There's money out there working in the field of economics and finance.
Well, that's interesting though, because they did go out and get some American Rescue money from the federal government from the infrastructure plan,
Right?
and maybe we should bring somebody on to talk about how they spent that money, right? What they asked for, what they got,
Yeah.
what they prioritized, because these things are essential to the conversation about whether or not you can even get into a place where you can lower property taxes, because solidify the economic base, create some development. Let me ask you a question, because we're starting to get late, so I want to make sure we wrap it up. And
Yes, sir.
but I'll bring you into a conversation that I had with one of the trustees, and I asked them what was the strategy for broadband. And so uh, in Iowa, where I'm at, um, we are creating a municipality owned broadband system. We're using money from the infrastructure bill, some of it to help pay for it. And so basically, once it's done, we'll have fiber to every house and every business in the community. You pay your bill just like you pay your water bill.
Right.
And do you think that is something that Maywood should be pursuing?
They got the space. They got the resources. I think they should. I think they should pursue a what's the word I'm looking for? A review, if you will. They should conduct a review to see if it's economically feasible for the village and to see if it's something that will benefit them economically over a period of time. Because we know what may be good for one community may not be good for another community. So,
Mm-hmm.
what's the population in your community?
So we're 68,000. I know Maywood is around 20 to 25. Our
Yeah.
sister city, Cedar Falls, they already have their own electric and company and stuff like this. They have built a what do you call it, a solar farm.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but they're about 40,000. So
Okay.
even that community is
Close.
a little bit bigger,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it still makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, because we started off saying communities generally only rely on property taxes to fund the government,
Yeah.
and if you don't start thinking creatively about how to solve the problem of generating enough revenue to pay salaries uh, you know, to take care of the village, then you'll price yourself out, right?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. So, in my work here in Northern Virginia, this is one of the wealthiest areas in the entire country. But it didn't start that way, Terry. They took bold concepts, bold approaches to ensure a strong future for the Northern Virginia area, whether it is Stafford County, Prince William County, Fredericksburg County, and one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest county in the United States, Fairfax County. They did things, they focused on technology and data. They had a strategic plan. They had meetings with residents. They did a strategic analysis, which means they connected with the community and they saw whether or not, their steps were economically feasible. People think that here in the DC area, it's just government employees making good money and they just living. Well, they want to spend their money somewhere and they want to be in a community that's safe, but yet prosperous. And so
Mm-hmm.
they built the community, the DMV is what they call it, to fit that. So in my work here, I see what's taking place, and that goes to best practices. Terry, another area I want to talk about is in the South, in the Atlanta area.
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta has a city, but then you have surrounding suburbs, and they are their own vehicles, their own economic vehicles when it comes to providing businesses and safe schools. And these are African American communities, Black and brown communities that are doing very well because they are internal, they're working together. And so I strongly encourage the mayor, the village trustees, and the community to have real conversations about how to implement a strategic plan and not just all of a sudden pop off and say, hey, let's have a fest, or hey,
Yeah.
let's have this program where it's costing more money or it's only costing money and you're not generating any revenue. We need to be more revenue focused instead of expenditure focused in
Well,
that
I'll tell
regards.
you this: these decisions that are made today are 50 to 60-year-old problems. You're not gonna build something and then tear it down 2 years later. It's not working. You got to start off, the right way. Now, you
Yeah,
do have experience with community development, right, and city
absolutely.
planning and stuff, right?
My master's, and matter of
Mm-hmm.
fact, my master's thesis was on the village of Maywood. It was about the village of Maywood and the infrastructure and the economy. And my doctorate was inclusive of Maywood in terms of the residential and economic aspects. So I'm not just talking from an experience of living in Maywood. I actually did the research in Maywood in terms of the economic functions of Maywood. So experience is there on both sides. And Maywood is my love, man. I mean, I always
Well,
talk about Maywood.
I was about to say full disclosure. I never lived in Maywood, but I feel like I did because I spent all of my time there. Right,
Absolutely,
all
absolutely.
my friends lived in Maywood. We,
Yeah,
I went over there every day. I passed through it going to Triton and
yeah,
all those other things. So,
absolutely.
um,
I'm
I
gonna
feel
share.
like.
Yeah,
Go
go ahead.
ahead.
Well, I was going to say, in just today in my business class, I was talking to the students. These are high performing students, in the IB program, and I was sharing a little bit about Maywood, where I came from and things of that nature. And I said a lot of people who are successful came from Maywood because they looked at the demographics and the average income and the crime rate and all that. I said, listen, Village of Maywood um, is a good community with potential, but it was an established community where a lot of people came and did quite successful in different areas of life, not just athletics, but academics and entertainment, things of that. So I called one of my buddies, Moses Green, who's a very successful businessman in Nashville, who's doing great things in Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and so forth, and called him. He started talking to the students right there from my phone and talked a little bit about his story and how what steps he took to become the successful businessman that he is today. And I always tell people all the time, Terry, you talked about you're adopted Maywoodian, by the way. You're
Right.
yeah. But I tell people all the time, even in Maywood, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. You may not have the greatest um household growing up. We all had our stories growing
Yeah.
up in Maywood. Those of us who went out and aspired to higher heights, greater heights, and are doing well. But not all of us grew up in a two-parent household. Not all of us grew up in a safe environment. Not all of us had, you know, a silver spoon in our mouths when we were born. Not all of us grew up in North Maywood, had
Mm-hmm.
access to, strong financial ties. Many Maywoodians who grew up during my time and even the generation behind me, they worked hard. It was a working class community. Even today, with his income, it's not even 50,000. There's a range between 44 and 52,000, whatever. But that's still something to live off of
Yeah.
and something to build on. So I always tell the young people, don't give up. Keep fighting, regardless of the circumstance. If you remain prayerful and you continue to work and remain steadfast on your goal, you will be somebody and you will have a testimony. Okay, we can't forget about the spiritual element because all things are possible with God. And I
Yes.
tell children and adults who are struggling, people I went to high school with and things like that, I'm giving back, man. I'm giving back. I'm helping some of the people I grew up with who may have fell in hard times as adults. They took a wrong turn. I'm actually helping right now with either getting financials in order, helping them start a business, or whatever the case may be. Because it's all about
Mm-hmm.
servitude at the end of the day. But imagine if the people who are in power utilize that power for the good instead of being divisive.
So hopefully we can, continue this in a couple of weeks. But you said something that's important, that people in Maywood, they have been successful, and some level they may not live in the state of Illinois anymore and things like this. But and this is not just a Maywood problem, because Black people, when we get two nickels to rub together, what do? We move out of our communities
Yeah,
and move into predominantly white communities, and then we talk about the problem that we have there. So
absolutely.
I would be interested in having a conversation about, in this strategic plan, how do you create space for someone that maybe is affluent or better, right? We think of, there's a lot of professional athletes and
Yeah,
things like this. How do you get them to come back and invest in Maywood?
absolutely.
Um, Maybe not with, I won't get into the weeds with it right now, but
Right.
that's something that we should really consider talking about. And again, it is the basis for why a strategic plan is necessary at this moment.
Well, as you know, Terry, you and I are both experts in our craft, and we went through the training. We've been developed, and we have the real life experience in our fields to make a difference. And that's why we had these podcasts, so we can have real conversations in this space. And my hope and my goal is that in some capacity, we're able to provide assistance on a greater level to provide support in the village of Maywood. I offer my services as an economics expert and working in the field of finance and even education to enhance what's taking place in the village of Maywood so we can create a comprehensive strategic plan that is realistic, okay, because there's something called SMART goals, where it's specific, where it's measurable, it's achievable, and it's relevant, all right,
Mm-hmm.
and it's time sensitive, all right. So you have those type of tools in place in a strategic plan. Again, it's painting a picture that is realistic for the village of Maywood and the community and the residents. They'll start believing in the government when you have something like that in place.
When we talk about time sensitive, the things that I know about this federal funding, you got about a 3-year window to access a large amount of money that is coming down. And what that really means is really for Maywood, probably 2 years to put together a strategic plan that can be presented to the federal government for funding that is a once in a generation investment in communities. And if Maywood doesn't capitalize on it, shame on them.
I agree. And again, this is an opportunity for us to, to make a difference. And you and I are already making a difference. I mean, giving back is what it's what about. It's what it's all about. And certainly, you know, I don't have the money like a Michael Finley or a Doc Rivers or a Sheila Johnson, so forth and so on. But if I could just give anything, whether it's, which what we do, financial or non-financial, then it only adds to what, the village of Maywood hopes to accomplish in the future. But again, I implore the leadership in the village of Maywood to consider a strategic plan in the village of Maywood. And did you have video, Terry, of a couple people who talked about what they wanted in the strategic plan, or were you able to break that down?
Yeah, I'll as we close out, I'll play their video, and I'll say this last thing, and then I'll let you close. But um, Maywood is unique, and they should not miss the opportunity that they have. Right,
Yeah.
um, so close to being in downtown Waterloo, right next to River Forest, which is affluent neighborhood. They could create a space where Maywood is on a different trajectory in terms of, who lives there, what kind of businesses are there, and but the time is now to do it. And if they don't do it, you heard me say this earlier. Maywood will have a Hispanic mayor in within 5 years.
Yeah, that's a fact. And it's not like we're trying to read a crystal ball or anything, but considering, everything that's been happening in the village of Maywood and the evolution of the demographics, um, all that has to be taken into account, Terry. All
Mm-hmm.
that has to be considered. But again, whether whether we, because I still consider Maywood my home, a Hispanic mayor, continue to have African American mayor, or whatever case may be, we have to be smart. We have to be measurable. We have to be achievable. It has to be relevant. It has to be time bound or time specific to get things in place in the village of Maywood. And again, to not be reactive but be proactive. What is the goal for Maywood over the next 3 to 5 years? What is the vision? The vision of Microsoft was to have a personal computer in every home. If you have a vision, write it, make it plain, because where there is no vision, what? The people will perish.
Paris.
You
Yep.
have to have a vision. So hopefully, and I see the quotes of the scripture and people praising God and everything. Let's praise him not only for what he's done, but for what he's about to do. I don't want to
Yep.
preach. I'm just saying, because I'm a preacher, but we have to put our money where our mouth is. You know what I'm saying? And we have to think about the community at large. We have to think about the youth. We have to think about the unemployed. We have to think about the formerly incarcerated. We have to think about the seniors. We have to think about the future of Maywood. And we have to use that unused land and make it happen. If there's homes that are boarded up, tear them down and start over. Make it attractive in the village of Maywood. Put that in the strategic plan and put together a realistic budget that's going to propel the village of Maywood on a level where it is as attractive as River Forest, as Oak Park, as Westchester,
Yeah.
as Bellwood, as Broadview, as LT, Lyons Township, as Naperville, as Schaumburg, wherever you can proudly say, I am from the village of Maywood, and we are doing great things in that community.
Well, I don't know any other way to close this out than what you just said, which is write a vision and make it plain,
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's the way to do it. Paint that picture, that great art, so everybody can see it. That vision, that portrait, that portfolio will equal progress.
Mm-hmm.
And that is all we have to say on this podcast. And we hope and pray that you continue to tune in to this podcast, Let's Talk Maywood, as we bring on our next phenomenal guest and talk about issues or topics that are important to the village of Maywood. Until next time, God bless you. Be safe. Good night.
What I like to see in the village of Maywood's next strategic plan is to use the funds to create programs for the youth to give them an opportunity to develop civic engagement, leadership, and show them that they can make a difference in their community. Someone said to me, nothing changes on a national level until it changes locally. For example, the Eternal Light Community Service that Dr. Ratliff created 22 years ago has been a groundbreaking. I'm hoping that he can bring that back to give the youth an opportunity. Thanks.
On my vision of Maywood, it is simple. I envision a thriving Maywood, greeneries from tree covering on tree canopy to help the environment, improve the quality of air. We are and we need to alleviate the blight and create a safe community that each of us can call home.